Welcome to Small Town Tales, a podcast where we hear stories of the paranormal, haunting legends, and all things spirit. Join us as we explore the unknown. Now, here's your host, C.L. Thomas.
First of all, thank you guys for being on the show.
It's my pleasure.
So how did you two get involved in the field of demonology and exorcism?
Carl? I have to finish my candy. Okay. Well, because that makes us think.
Yes.
No, we can say that I've always had an interest in that subject, those topics. In the paranormal, growing up in a haunted house, not every day, most days were business as usual in the house, but my parents' house was subject to paranormal activity. So naturally, I was interested in why chairs would be moved and objects would be found in different areas of the house. We'd have footsteps where there wasn't anybody there, strange extraneous voices. So I thought, this is cool. There's more than meets the eye. And it was natural that when I got in my teens, I should want to be a paranormal investigator. But the dark side always seemed to follow me. Whenever there was a case available to investigate, it seemed like it had some sinister leanings to it. And I guess my demonologist career began with being introduced to Ed and Lorraine Warren at Rhode Island College. They were presenting a lecture, and I attended, and Ed was asking questions of the audience. Raise your hand. How many people here have seen a ghost? How many people have done something like magic ritual? You know, and so I'm like, oh, okay.
I'm going to
And then he said, come up here, young man. And I was 17 at the time, and I actually became part of their lecture. And the persons who organized the lecture, there was a paranormal investigative group at Rhode Island College. They invited me to join their team, their investigating group, and so I did. And that's how we became involved in that house in Harrisville, Rhode Island, that they call the Conjuring House after the movie, the real life setting for the movie The Conjuring. And our team at Rhode Island College is called PIRO, Parapsychological Investigatory and Research Organization, PIRO. And since we were acquainted with the Warrens, when we were investigating the parent house in Harrisville, we thought it might be a nice touch. This was after we were investigating it for a month. It might be a nice touch to call in Ed and Lorraine, whom we knew. It's not that we felt at any time we were in over our heads. We just thought it would be a nice professional touch to benefit from the Warrens' vast experience. So actually, Ed invited himself to come and investigate the house, Ed and Lorraine. And so that is how I became a demonologist, because that was my first residential case, starting out at the top, the Conjuring House. And my next residential case, full-blown investigation, turned out to be a case of demonic possession in Providence, Rhode Island. And I learned a lot through that. I'm thinking, why do they think I'm some kind of expert? Why are they calling me into this? I did have something of a reputation for an investigator that would stand his ground. I wouldn't run out. I wanted to a few times, but it did turn out the subject was a 14-year-old boy in Providence, and I saw that through. I feigned a lot of that confidence that they saw in me. It's like I just wanted to get back to my parents' house. I know there's food in the refrigerator. I just want to get back. But something else told me, if I leave now, I'll never be able to go into some situation like this again. I'll be too apprehensive. So we saw it through, and the boy did come through it. He is better for the experience. So it did seem like all these cases had something to do with, even before I called it demonology. Then somebody brought a magazine article to my attention. They said, Carl, you're mentioned in this, along with the Warrens, you're mentioned in this article. I said, oh, let me see. And it said, Carl Johnson, the demonologist in Rhode Island. So I said, well, yeah, okay, that has a ring to it. Okay, I'll be a demonologist. That's good. And yeah, you get invited to a lot more parties if you're a demonologist, but
especially nowadays,
people don't want you, like their church services. But so that's it. Just seemed to find me, and every time I've gotten away from it, it was always called me back.
For sure.
Like the investigations of that ilk. So we need somebody who's experienced. We need somebody who has can come up against these things. So you're only as good as your last demonic situation. So but you do learn every time. So. And then this gentleman came into my life, and he is also a demonologist. Maybe he can tell you a little bit about how he became such.
Yeah, no, definitely, Carl. I think what's interesting is we're polar opposites in the way that we got involved in paranormal.
Yes.
You had the experiences growing up, and then, of course, you kind of get antiquated with the individual that is known as, for most, the kind of what brought demonology to the forefront in our Western culture. And, of course, that's not really the truth. But in pop culture, it is.
Yes. Popular interpretation.
Basically, what happened to me is I had a traumatic childhood, and I was given up by both my parents, and I won't explain the way, but the way I was told it to happen and occur. So I was baptized, Roman Catholic. Of course, that was not my choice, and as a child, you don't have that right. So I was told, I remember going through the court system, I remember going through all this, and I was adopted, and these people were Lutheran service people, and they would go to Lutheran church every Sunday, die hard. I had to go through Bible study and all that fun stuff. And so throughout this whole time of hearing the story of how my parents gave me up and how they gave me up, I started kind of articulating an idea of God is not so great. And this was done to me. Why? I'm a child. I'm supposed to be this very beautiful thing and loved and given care to. But why did this happen to me? So at such a young age, I started really looking into many different forms of biology and forms of theology when I could actually read. And of course, I went through Bible study at a young age, and this all happened when I was 4 years old. So, of course, being 5, 6, 7, this is when you start to learn how to, speak and how to learn how to read, write. So I was very interested and got into Darwinism at such a young age. I love Charles Darwin and what he was able to discover with the Galapagos Islands, and started really maybe thinking, evolution has a big part to it, and that cancels God. But I also loved in my childhood, most scariest places on earth, most haunted. I loved Scooby-Doo. I loved Tales of the Crypt. I love In Search of.
So you're saying the television warped you and turned you into what you became?
But I came to love the supernatural, and I came to love the unknown, and I really started to understand maybe people talk about spirits and ghosts. Scooby-Doo, they were always able to make it a physical element. There was somebody duping somebody. And people forget that. They laugh when I say it, but Scooby-Doo was a true key to what we do nowadays, because a lot of people, unfortunately, are duped by the natural senses and by what can occur. And we dupe ourselves. So I think that these shows kind of made me think, where I started doubting God and didn't believe in God and tried to go to the scientific realm, the STEM routes, science, mathematics, engineering. And I basically fell in love with paranormal investigating, and the Ghost Hunters came out. I was around. So I started investigating around 15 years old, just because I thought maybe if I could figure out what ghosts were. Of course, a very silly thing to think of. But as a child, as a young teenager, I thought I could solve that answer, being brash, of course. And so I started investigating at 15, and I started doing a lot of local surroundings in Rhode Island. I had people in East Greenwich. We went to Mercy Brown's. We hear all these vampire legends and all these tales, of course, Salem witch trials. Being in New England, you hear this stuff, the Crucible, you read in school. So we started going to a lot of these places that I could as a teenager. And, being 16, 17, people could drive, and we could drive. You're not supposed to technically, but we still get away with it. So we would drive to these locations, and I really got kind of involved with it seriously in a form of this could help me prove something. But of course, it was also a hobby. how that really has a meaning to, of course, Carl, and where we're at today is when I got out of the military, I started being involved in it again very heavily. Of course, when you're in the military, you have some connection, but I was away. I only served a year, but I did all my basic and AIT, and then basically afterwards, I got medically discharged. So I fell in a deep, dark depression, and I started investigating again as a forms of means for me to get out and going to places and seeing history. But I had a prolific experience in the military where I started being religious again. So I looked at it in a different light. I had this experience where I got baptized again when I was, at a church service just to get away. So when I got out of the military, I had a different perspective. I actually became a pastoral assistant at the Church of Christ here in Rhode Island, and then eventually became ordained through the Church of Christ as a minister. And I was very involved in the paranormal before all this ministry work. I actually got together with a man named Carl Johnson as his tech manager of the group Beyond the Veil.
You knew he was out there.
I became tech manager of Beyond the Veil Paranormal, which Carl was co-founder of. But how we met was actually through his brother Keith initially, because I was talking to his brother Keith. I used to be electronics department manager at Walmart, and Keith, I recognized Keith from Ghost Hunters. And I said, "Hey, man, I respect your work," and I knew he was a demonologist. I followed Carl and Keith's line of work in some form. So we started talking about recorders and stuff like that, to drift away, not to speak too long, but I come from a computer programming background and networking background. I went to school, Vodtech school for my CCNA, and then for Cisco. And then I went to college before going to the military for a computer program at New England Tech. So I love technology. I was building computers since a kid. And so I basically had met Keith first, which is interesting. And then Carl was in a case, demon attacks, that was shot in Orange, Massachusetts. So it was a legitimate case. And there was a group called RIPS, Rhode Island Paranormal Society. And they came across this case where they had brought Carl involved. And of course, the paranormal field's about turmoil. So RIPS fell apart after that case. And the co-founding member of RIPS, Andre, we were great friends, and he knew I was very interested in paranormal investigating. We created a group with a few of the members that were a part of that episode, Stephen Pacheco, and Shane went his separate ways. But so we started a group called Ghost Hunters of Supernatural Truth. Ghost. So we started investigating, and of course, I knew about the story, and I put two and two together. Oh, Carl Johnson, you did this case, because it wasn't on air yet. I said, let me talk to Carl. Carl and I hit it off.
Yeah.
And
Little did we know, after all these years, we'd be together.
Yeah, and we came together, and but basically, it was so many different things. It's polar opposite. I didn't go through those experiences. I didn't meet the Warrens. I definitely believe I met the Warrens of my time, which is Carl and Keith in Demonology.
Oh, thank you, yes.
And I really do respect Carl as my first mentor. Why Duo Daemonology consists of Carl and myself, because this man's vast knowledge, and I respect where he's come from, where he came from. Like I said, it's polar opposite for me. I had to find my way, but I also went the ministry route too. He went many different other routes too.
I routed around.
But it entitled me to search, become ordained, and then eventually get ordained as a deacon through the old Catholic Church. So I was ordained in two different churches. I have theology associate's degree. So it really was a big full spin to me. Yes, I am a demonologist, and I love demonology. I love paranormal investigating, but I really love the realm of what if, what is it, but also helping people and easing them and making them feel loved and respected, because that's how humanity should exist.
So how do you like all that? It gives you a nutshell.
Yeah, that's a long answer.
Yeah.
But
James and I have a definition of demonology that we use for for Duo Daemonologie, our research unit. And that is, demonology is the systemized study of the lore and cultural traditions of wicked spirits. There's applied demonology and there is a scholastic or academic demonology. We try to incorporate both. Applied demonology is when you actually consult with people and they contact you and ask for advice with their situations. And sometimes we're fortunate to be able to meet these people and go to their homes and help them out.
True. And true, it's why Carl and I gave long answers too, is,
you'll listen to us.
Well, to be honest, it's not that we are better than anybody else, but yeah, we are paranormal investigators and researchers, but we take a whole nother route. Demonology is so expansive. We deal with psychology. We work with doctors. We go so many routes. And the way where we got are the routes that we had taken, what he went through, what he experienced, what I went through and experienced, is really the reasons we are what we are and why we're specialized in what we do. It's the stories that made us and how we are able to help other individuals because of what we went through and how we tackled it and how our structure and faith was built. And it really is a meaning to what we do and why we are demonologists. And I really believe that. It's a call.
I have a question about the church. It's really tough to get any comments or answers from the Catholic Church in particular in regards to anything demonology. Why is this?
It's true. You don't get a lot of answers from the church. I find the clergy is really reluctant to discuss those issues.
Yeah.
Because there aren't answers, or the answers are controversial. And it's not really their specialty or their forte. Because they don't get too many people that come to the parish or the church and say, Father, my house is haunted, or my pastor, I need to talk to you. We have ghosts in our house. And the clergy really, they're not trained in that in most cases, so they don't know what to say, how to respond. And it's a bugaboo, and they don't want to be known as the church that talks to haunted people and talks about ghosts and things. So it still is controversial. It's still not widely accepted. I mean, it's popular on television programs and in the movies, but in, like mundane life, it's not so embraced, and certainly not by churches.
And it's also different too in our culture, in American culture. It's, of course, William Blatty's novel, The Exorcist, and the movie was an incorporation of why we understand possession and all that stuff in American culture. But of course, in Italy, it's prevalent. There's, Father Gabriel Amorth, who was the chief exorcist for the Catholic Church, has said to have been performed over 100,000 exorcisms in his time, I do believe. And that's a lot, but it's more prevalent over there. It's old culture, old civilization, more history. So it is going to be prevalent in those areas. Hell, people in Europe still believe in freaking fairies. So let's just be honest here, guys, to ourselves. But so it depends. But a lot of priests don't believe in demons. And as a person that was ordained within the Catholicism, and I went through the canon and the catechisms. And dealt with many different priests from Roman or from Greek Orthodox or from Old Catholics or traditionals, is that, they really truly sometimes don't believe in it anymore. It's not as archaic as the forms of the witch hunts and the belief systems. They really do tackle the psychological realm now. Most exorcists within the Roman Catholic Church are PhDs in psychology. They have a psychology background. So they don't really want to jump to that conclusion anymore. It like I said, it is prevalent in Italy, but it's prevalent because more people think it is. And in a sense, an exorcist will still perform an exorcism on certain individuals as a form of psychotherapy, because like Hippocrates performed it as the father of medicine. Sometimes it does work when the person really truly believes it will work, if that's what they want. But most priests don't believe that demons exist. They think it's a metaphoric and a psychological element, and but there are priests that do believe it exists.
Allegorical, metaphoric. It's I feel it's symbolic.
I've seen and heard about priests running out of houses. If I didn't see it from my own eyes, then I would have never believed it.
Well, they're human, and
but
sometimes you want to run out of a house. I just haven't, but wanted to.
But as I tell people, and I have a different perspective of how I believe in God, and maybe a different theory or perspective of how things exist in this universe, and Carl maybe as well. But in the same sense, if there is good, then there's definitely an evil, and it could either be metaphoric, it could be expressed and projected by an individual, but it can still exist, and there's many different interpretations of what we deal with. And what really truly does exist is what Carl and I have experienced, and other people that have experienced. But the Catholic Church doesn't talk about it, and not to make this long-winded answer because it can be, is that the Catholic Church also doesn't talk about it because a lot of it's personal. They don't film their exorcisms. They do transcribe them with somebody transcribing the whole the situation, case files, and they at times do record it audibly through an audio device. But they don't. It's hush hush. It's like a psychologist or a therapist with their individual. Yes, they record it, but they're not going to tell the whole world that what this person said. It's a personal thing. It's in between the individuals. That's why it's also hush hush, and they don't talk about it because they also say too, if you let evil be known, evil rebels. So they also don't want to feed it and make it more prolific than it.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. It's a touchy subject because you can understand why even a cleric, a man of the cloth, would be reluctant to talk about these subjects because you talk about it, you personify them. You don't know what you're bringing in. It's a resonance. You might call something in or invite it unwillingly. And of course, since they are spiritual people, they're going to think that way. They may not acknowledge literal demons, but it's a scary thing to think that they might be out there. So, that's why a lot of people don't want to hear about demonology.
In the paranormal field, though, there are hundreds of people claiming to be demonologists. As the paranormal field, it's like really trendy right now.
Yes.
Do you think most people are in it to truly help others, or do you think it's just Hollywood?
Well, no, I think it's both. I think they want to, they're genuinely altruistic and they want to help others. But I think the lure is what they've been exposed to through media. Yeah, you see demonology, you think you're going to get something exciting, that something bizarre might happen, and it does sometimes. But I think that's what brings people into it, and that's why they want to specialize in demonology. It is fascinating, but it's not that you're going to get a thrill a minute either. Sometimes bizarre things do occur, but there's many months of in between of like listening to recordings, analyzing evidence, reviewing people's cases and all. But and we've even been able to establish some commonalities. What's common to these cases? What happens a lot? Yeah. And there's like A, B, C, and C things that we do look for and do happen. And if it's what we would adjudicate as a genuinely demonic case, I think, people have seen it in the movies and the television shows. Demonology seems exciting, Like we might see somebody propelled across a room, or, who knows, we'll hear the growls and the voices. Come to think, we do experience things like that sometimes.
Yeah. But that doesn't always mean they're demonic.
You can't get into the field because of that, because it's not, it's fascinating, but it's not that thrilling to be a demonologist. You have moments.
And there's going to be, of course, people, in reality, like Carl said, you heard an article, he took part in that, the lineage of that, even though he did work with somebody that was really respected by the certain church to be of what he was. And there's credence in that. But there are going to be people who study or want to involve themselves in something and predicate it on doing good for people. But what is truly good for people if they are doing injustice to these individuals, saying it's a demon when in fact it's a mental illness, or they were raped when they were younger, and they're having these episodes, these projections that are haunting them, that are becoming in a form of a demon. And then you're telling them it's a demon, and you're doing the wrong thing to them. Is that really helping them, or is that making them worse? Yes, it can help some people by feeding what they want, as I stated, but there's too many people that jump into it because of the paranormal. Hell, I wish everything was spirits and ghosts and demons, because it would be so cool. It would be so cool, but
It'd be
unfortunately,
easier to understand.
but
too.
unfortunately, it's not. And people want to be gullible and believe it is. I'm not stating, Carl will never not state that we've never not experienced things that cannot be explained. We have. But when you're a demonologist, you're looking at it in a 360 perspective. You have to look at it in a spiritual sense, a psychological sense, a physical sense, and you have to not come up necessarily the conclusion. Yes, we can say we dealt with demonic cases, but Carl, between the both of us and 60 plus years of experience,
That's combined experience.
How many cases have we ever dealt with that we could say maybe adjudicate the demonic?
Well, we thought about it. We came up with a figure. It's 5 and 5, for each of us. As far as cases like, I'm pretty sure this was demonic.
Yeah.
Whatever its origins or ramifications, this was a demonic case. Only 5 in all the years.
Out of a ballpark of how many?
I would say I was, to be honest, I ran the Dominion Ministry, which was one of the largest spiritual warfare groups. It was Christians, it was pagans, it was Buddhists, it was rabbis. So I was doing so many cases, like ridiculous numbers. It was an LLC. It wasn't for profit, but it was because I needed insurance. But I was doing cases like all the time. I'd have to say if I have to give an accurate number, I'd have to say anywhere from the 400 to 600 range of cases that I dealt with in 15 years, 16 years of being involved.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine Carl's number.
For me, it's hard to say.
48 years, 49 years.
Yeah, and I don't know what I want to call an actual case.
Yeah.
If you consulted somebody over the phone or went to their house.
I would say that's the case.
Yeah.
I would say that's the case.
So,
A lot.
when a client calls you and asks you for help, what is your assessment process for determining if it was
We
a
have a
demon?
questionnaire that we can distribute to them, and if they are serious about wanting help, they'll be willing to go through that questionnaire, which is rather ponderous, and answer the questions. But it's only aimed to help us gain a better understanding.
Yeah.
Like
what medications they take. Are they under illegal substances? Do they drink heavily? When they've been experiencing this, did they experience this before they move in? And how I necessarily take that questionnaire form, and I think Carl as well, is you take the questionnaire form. I do it electronically first, and then I do it verbally in person.
You get to know the person
and see if their story changes. So it's really analyzing. It's not interrogation in some sense, but it has to be in some form as well, because some people don't tell their stories. They withhold information. They don't, but that questionnaire definitely gets nitty gritty.
Yeah, a lot of people don't expect such an involved questionnaire. Like, why are you asking these things?
You see a psychologist.
And a problem is that a lot of persons, James can concur with this, self-diagnose. They say, I have a demon in my house. You gotta go. I have so many human spirits. I have ghosts, but I have a demon problem, and that's what's really,
And I just want to get rid of the demon, but keep the human
This
spirit.
what really needs addressing.
But it's
not that subtle to be able to pick and choose.
And I think, and what people need to hear, and that's something what Duo Daemonology does. We try. Of course, we're not all knowing. We do our best to be very familiarized with as much as we can. He knows a hell of a lot more than I do, but I might know something he doesn't know, and vice versa. We try to utilize that companionship and understanding. But what people always, they jump to a conclusion, and that's the worst thing you can do. And we don't tend to do that, and we don't tend to handle a situation like that, because how can you equate something to be demonic in one visit, 2 visits, 3 visits? If you have the even if you have the psychic guide, if you understand what a demon was, they're very methodical. They're very deceiving, and so it's going to show you as a demon, right? First and foremost. But that's not what a demon does. It's very shadowy. It's luring. It lurks in the shadows.
Subtle.
Subtle, yeah. And but so many people that come to us that say they're possessed, they are initially already not possessed, because for one of the biggest criteria of somebody being truly on a fit of possession, usually a transient possession, which is where it comes and goes depending on the battle of the free will, is that they won't know they're possessed. they might notice differences within themselves, but they won't know they're possessed. It's an outside influence that notices these things. And anytime that somebody comes to us and say that they are possessed or they're dealing with the demon, most likely they're not, especially if it's them.
Is there a difference between oppression and possession?
Oh, yeah, it's a gradation. Oppression is an earlier stage where you know somebody's becoming detached and you can't really pinpoint why. It may be totally psychologically based at that point, but oppression is when they're a little disassociative. You know, something's wrong. You can tell it. They're not being themselves. And you try to isolate the cause. What are they going through? But it could be something that leads to something deeper, you know, a deeper condition, which would be possession. But that is an early stage oppression. But it's a time to be guarded. It's a time to watch and observe the person and see what they react to. You know, are they starting to like say things that have a religious bent but are hostile? You know, are they losing interest in all things? But again, is a symptom of depression. But try to find out what that person's into. Are they exploring the darker side? Are they getting into destructive behavior?
Yeah.
And are they starting to act really not like themselves, like it's something invasive, something taking over them? So, yeah, that's a warning. That's the yellow caution light when it's oppression in our line.
And too, there's another O that most people don't talk about. It's obsession, where that oppression can become obsessive. That they become obsessed with it. But sometimes even oppression could be negated, and they could be already straight as obsessor. They obsess about it. They want it. They want it to happen. But yeah, oppression is very different. You know, that oppression is, like Carl said, is like that ransacking of the individual. Like it beats them down. It tries to put you in a state, catatonic state. Yeah. But possession only can occur once that person, unfortunately, gives an invitation. And that invitation could be in the form of "I give up." It could be, like I said, they might not know they're possessed, so it could be just a mental give up. I can't do this anymore. Or they if they had a spiritual belief system, like they were a Christian and they believed in God, the detachment from God, they could detest God and say, "I don't, screw you, God," or "I don't believe you anymore." And that could be that they lose their faith. And there's that foothold.
That's something of an invitation too. There's in demonic lore, the demon must be invited to take hold. There are different forms that invitation can take when it's extended. It's not always somebody saying, "Oh, I want the devil to serve me," or "I want to give my soul over." Sometimes it's as minute and as subtle as somebody losing their faith and being angry. A lot. And you see it in sexual tendencies as well, like an incubi and succubi. That invitation is sexually. If you allow the sexual nature to continue, that's an invitation for it to continue. Because there are moments and there are literatures that say that in that moment somebody had ended it, said, "Get off me, leave." And that was enough to cancel because they weren't allowance of that situation. So it could be any different circumstance, and that's what's dangerous. It could be that something knocking on the door and you opening the door. That could be the form of infestation starting, and it could be as simple as that because you open the door. There's never a noticeable pattern of that circumstance, but you have to be cautious and careful. And, but when you're being oppressed, like Carl said, which is a deep word, depressed, which most people claim to be nowadays, depressed.
Right.
So I just can't
we're eating a lot of candies. I think I'm ahead on the candy game from James. That's just the other way around. I think I've been really plowing into them.
We will be right back with more from Duo Daemonologie after we take this quick break.
Coming in February, a special book for all Small Town Tales listeners. Speaking to Shadows by C.L. Thomas. What ghostly shadows stalk the night deep in the bayous. A historical tale promising to keep you awake at night. Stories of ghosts, voodoo, and mystery over haunted swamps, leaving death and destruction. Available February 25th on Amazon. For signed copies and pre-release information, email smalltowntalespodcast@gmail.com. Now, back to C.L. Thomas.
When someone thinks of a person possessed, they think of someone spitting up nails and
Yep.
eating spiders and all of this kind of stuff. Have you guys witnessed that kind of stuff?
It's a lot less dramatic than that in most cases. It could be the person becomes remote and distances themselves, and they really don't always thrash around and, the subjects when we're trying to expel a demon. However, people who have been inured to that, we have a Western cultural interpretation of what is a demon, and that's thanks to, as James mentioned, William Peter Blatty's novel and later the movie, The Exorcist. That defined what a demon is to a lot of people, and that defined demonic possession. So they figure the demon will resist, so it's going to thrash about and spit up nails and things. And, it's rarely that dramatic. It does happen sometimes. The person goes into kind of a seizure and a fit, an emotional outrage, and they don't even remember what happened afterwards. And it's genuine. Like a case in Oklahoma I had, case in Providence, case in, Baltimore, Maryland, where somebody they became essentially another person when this other invasive entity took over them. And it's freaky to see. They're not play acting it. And sometimes strange things, inexplicable occurrences do happen, like that case in Providence. How did that 14-year-old boy, how was he propelled out of his room as if he was flung? You can only explain so much with accelerated motor performance. His body spun around and he climbed on the walls like the spider crawl. And he was doing things that a person should not be able to do. Plus, removed objects were affected. The family was Catholic, so they had some iconography in their house. They had religious pictures and some statuary. Well, religious pictures on cue came off the wall. If it was some coincidence, a picture of Jesus inverted itself. It flipped over. And,
wow.
These things shouldn't happen. I think it's due to essentially PK.
Psychokinesis.
Yeah, which is psychokinesis, PK. And the mind actually affects objects and makes them move around. So altogether, it did fit the criteria of demonic possession, with his dramatic change in personality, his hostility, his loss of interest in things around him, and the objects moving about. But he was better afterwards. So sometimes you really do hit pay dirt and see some strange things.
Yeah,
Well, what do you guys do to make him better?
Well, that's back to the state that I think that if somebody is under a fit of possession, you have to allure them and get their attention to understand what's kind of going on. You're not going to say, "Oh, you're possessed," but you're going to allure them. You're going to lure them back to their ability to fight. You're going to give them some credence.
That's the best approach to take. But in this case, in Providence, I believe she's asking about, none of those methods worked because he could not be reasoned with. He was convinced he was possessed. There was a lot of evidence to say he was. His family knew something was up. They thought he was possessed. And so essentially he was. And what happened was we needed the psychodrama and expulsion, which is a less formalized form of exorcism, where the spirit is actually cast out. And that was what was effective with him. I don't think that it was a literal demon, in a very broad sense, yes. But because you couldn't sit down and talk him out of that. It was, 1980 into 1981. People were hyped up about that movie, The Exorcist. You really couldn't explain it in psychological terms like dissociative personality disorder. He needed, and his aunt was Santeria, Santeria's persuasion. So she fed a lot of that too. And it went, all these things happening in his house, like pictures falling down off the wall, his body being flung about. The chair I was sitting in with me in it moved all the way back across the floor.
Oh, wow.
Freaky things were happening, right to the wall. Freaky things were happening there. So how could you say to somebody like that, especially decades ago, Well, it's a thing of the mind, you know. Demons aren't. They're kind of a picture you paint, and they're not real. Yeah, of course, it was real to them, so we had to play it as real. And you know, in a sense, as I said, in a broad sense, it was demonic. It was a demon.
Yeah.
But I think that demon is a projection, psychological or parapsychological projection. I think it's a construct of the mind, and that's how it's interpreted. That's how it acts. You know, that's just another interpretation of a very real force.
So do you ever have, when you go into these cases, do you ever carry that stuff home with you?
Well, we probably have taken an emotional, like it's, you know, in like the psychological sense, it's called transference, you know, when the therapist takes their person's emotions home with them. I think there's our episodes of transference when it comes to our cases, because, you know, these people most of the time are very distraught and very sad and emotional and in fear. And so it's hard not to take some of that home with you and kind of feel bad and burdened from it. But I think in the same sense, when we do this kind of line of work, like Carl said, he kind of, you know, why am I here? I'm not really the expert. But in that same tone, we have to have a level head to ourselves, our head on our shoulders. And I think that we have to understand there are dangers to this because it is the unknown, regardless if it's psychological or consciousness or some sort of projection or tulpa, thought form, poltergeist, whatever you want to call it. There might be that ability that consciousness can travel, because if you become a part of that reality, sort of that delusion, sometimes, of course, I hate to use that word, but we become part of that, like a shared hallucination, which can occur and has occurred for people. I think it can affect your life.
Yeah, when I've been around haunted activity for an evening, you know, be it a paranormal investigation or a ghost hunt or, you know, somebody that has a demonic problem, I come back, I said, geez, you know, it's hard to disassociate yourself from that, remove yourself from that scene. You know, it's like, I hope I didn't bring anything back with me. I'm still, you know, what I just saw is remarkable. Now I want to come down. Mm-hmm. But, you know, that's a matter of hours. And the next day I'm more detached from it.
Yeah, it's like the work.
Yeah, it's spooky stuff. And it'll stay with you for a while.
I like to use it. It's like leaving work at work and home at home. You have to separate work when you're done with it, and then go to your home life with a different mindset. Some people can't. Some people bring their work home with them, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah, I only had one instance where I really seemed to bring something with me. I was employed at old Slater Mill in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, which is justifiably regarded as the seat of the American Industrial Revolution. The building I worked in was built in 1793. There were actually 3 buildings on the campus. And besides being of great historic significance, all 3 were haunted. All 3 were subject to paranormal activity. So I developed a ghost hunting program there, you know, the evening tours. And but it was, as much stuff happened during the daytime there. That's where I first noticed it. I was usually working there in the daytimes. And there was a voice, the House of Voices. It was and is the Sylvanus Brown House, built in 1758. And by gum, that house had voices. You know, they would interrupt tours. We'd hear people speaking. Couldn't always make out what they were saying, but a child's laughter, people talking. And well, there was a sweet little girl ghost in that house, in the Sylvanus Brown House. Her name was Becca, because that's what kept coming out on the audio recordings when we investigated there. Becca. And she was our little ghost girl. She was a cute presence. You'd hear her giggling and, you know, wee, wee. Again, during the daytime, you'd hear that during tours and tour season. It was October 2018, and I was giving a tour of the house. We had 5 guests, so that made 6 of us all together. And we heard something that was different. It wasn't a child. We all heard it, too. It was a strange voice. But it was odd that it didn't have any of that little resonance, little echo afterwards. Like when we speak, we have a little echo we're accustomed to. And it's funny because just earlier that month, I had a ghost hunt there, and I advised 2 of the ladies to go downstairs. I said, if you're by yourselves, you're down to the kitchen, the 18th century kitchen, you might experience something if you're away from the group. So a middle-aged lady and a younger lady, they went downstairs. They came up a few minutes later, white-faced. They said, "Oh, we heard a witch's cackle. We heard it down there." I know they did. They were sincere. Well, I was just a couple of weeks later, I heard that same thing. I said, now I know why they said that was a witch's cackle. To me, I think it was that spirit that had tried to communicate with us. I think it was coming through more clearly, and it was trying to articulate words, if you know what I mean. It was trying to speak, and it couldn't quite manage to break that barrier. So what it came out with was, I can't sound just like it, but
That's creepy.
yeah, it's creepy stuff. And I went into the parlor where that voice came from. Of course, no one there, but it had that, effect like it was in like a chamber. So it went, a sound chamber, because it would stop suddenly. That is what AVP, audible voice phenomena, sounds like. It suddenly stops. I've heard that a number of times, and that was the place I heard it. Okay, flash ahead. Slater Mill went out of business because they were acquired by the National Park Service, and there was this big shutdown because of COVID. So go ahead 2 years to 2020, and I was taking a little hike to one of my meditation sites out in North Scituate, Rhode Island, the town in which I was raised. And I was driving back from this walk. I'm in my car. I'm turning from Rocky Hill Road onto Elmdale Road in North Scituate, Rhode Island. And in the car, the seat, I could see it here where it was coming from, the passenger seat in the front. What do I hear? I heard that, the same exact voice.
No way.
Like it was trying to break through. Now, there's a principle in quantum physics. It was developed by Nathan Rosen and Albert Einstein, called quantum entanglement. And that means that particles can be excited by particles at a distance, be that a micron apart or yards apart. And my guess, I don't know if I'd even call it a theory, my guess is that this spirit recognized me, missed me being there, because they knew I was the one who spoke to the spirits. And it located me like a GPS, like global positioning, found me and tried to make itself known. But I could even localize it. It was right next to me. I couldn't. I wish I was not the only one who heard it, but 5 other people heard it when I heard it in that house. But I heard it right in my car. It was exactly the same. But I could even proportion it, and I know where it was coming from. So that to me is, in that case, some people might call that an attachment. I just thought it was a pretty neat phenomenon that happened. That the spirit, it misses me. It wants to talk to me. Yeah. And that's the last I heard of it.
I feel silly if you think that if you get involved in this, that you won't experience some sort of kind of.
You stay at it, you will have strange experiences. Yes,
I did. So.
Maybe you will as well experience it. We're talking about it so much. Who knows? Let us know. Yeah, but I've been working there for a number of years, so I think this entity or presence, I think it recognized me and found me.
Yeah.
And it was spooky, but not scary. It was remarkable. Wish I could display it to somebody.
Have you ever tried to make contact with it again?
Yes, I've talked to it. I did say, I hear you. I know who you are. I know you. You're trying to talk to me. Thank you. Please talk to me again. You found me out. I spoke to it friendly. I wanted to acknowledge it. Of course, I can't know if it heard me or understood it. Well, maybe it did. But I haven't heard it since. I would love to hear it again.
It would be an interesting thing. It became telepathic too.
Yeah. Why didn't it come again after that?
That's true.
Why did it take that long? That's the only time I've had something happen that was associated with Slater Mill, something paranormal, associated with Slater Mill, but occurred outside of Slater Mill, outside of the grounds and the buildings. So I haven't heard it since. I can't explain why I haven't heard it. I would love to. You can talk to me more.
That's interesting.
I think it was trying to get through, and I think it was trying to articulate words.
That's good.
Have you guys heard of cases where individuals become, entirely different? You did mention that, but have you ever had any cases that ended up committing suicide or anything like that due to hauntings? No,
there was one case that I had where that they were eventually, of course, institutionalized. And they, of course, the paranormal of it was not likened to anymore, and they were institutionalized on that. And that I couldn't help at that form because, medicine speaks. So,
Right.
but no suicide. I think the only situation that I have to say that I dealt with was up in Lowell, Massachusetts, and it was for a mother that was seeking answers for her son who lived next door and who felt like was killed. I worked with this with Eclipse, and the mother sought us out because she wanted to see if she could talk to her son and see if he actually committed suicide or was actually killed, because she felt like he rubbed someone the wrong way. And if for people that are listening that know Lowell, Massachusetts, it's not the nicest of areas. And it has been known to be corrupt in the police and as well, of course, with crime syndicates. So we were asked to go into this house, and there was lots of blood. For somebody that supposedly hung themselves, there was lots of blood. And the cops basically swept under the rug and said he committed suicide. Here it shows there's a noose, there's a chair that's tipped over, his body was found. But if he hit his head that way, there would have not been that much blood splatter. I'm not smart when it comes to that stuff, but I'm pretty certain how it was explained to me, how he fell. Why was there blood over there? Why was there blood over there? There's no way. If you hit, so we never necessarily found out the answer if he was killed or not, but we definitely felt like that we did make contact that night. We had Leo Martin, who was a Buddhist monk, but who also has what I like to call abilities. And this is the only time I would believe I ever truly seen a form of automatic writing in my life. And we were asking, can you please come forth? And then, of course, we necessarily weren't getting answers physically. So Leo said, let me try something. Let me see if I can get a message. He's like, please use me as a conduit. And I'd seen nothing in the house. I'm privy of being nosy when it comes to people's houses and trying to look at little details, because everything has a story within the confines of somebody's house. So I try to see if there was maybe a signature, like graduation certificates, like anything about this person's life that I could maybe use to make communication. But basically what had happened is Leo, I do believe, was controlled by this individual. I really do believe he was killed, and he didn't commit suicide, but just from that emotion that I felt and being in that picture. But moral of the story is he actually wrote his signature. And the only reason we know is because when we showed his mom, the calligraphy, she's like, that's my son's signature. Yeah. And we said, how do you know? And she proved it to us by showing his license where the same signature was on the license.
Oh,
and it was
wow.
So it brought comfort to her knowing that, basically he was saying that I am there and I can see you and I'm all right. And that brought her, of course it wasn't the answer she wanted. It wasn't, didn't kill himself for it, but it was comfort to know that he gave us knowledge that he was there and he knows. And that brought a comfort. So I would say that would be my only situation in that extreme.
Well, I've had two situations where it actually was suicide, and so they're not all success stories. When I've done television episodes, invariably they've been a success story. They don't always have happy endings, that the cases that are illustrated on television shows, but generally they do. The family is saved and can stay in their home. But there was a case that was actually documented for a television episode, and it had a happy ending. But of course, they're not going to film a follow-up. And several years later, that woman took her life. I remember her name, and I was working on that case with Rosemary Ellen Guiley, the late Rosemary Ellen Guiley, top-notch author and investigator and researcher. And so things were she had a succession of misfortunes, and paranormal activity was interlaced with these setbacks. And after a while, it was too much for her, and we believe she ended her life. And that happened with another young woman, far too young to leave us, I thought. She was involved in a case I was investigating. I was called in as the demonologist. She was never the same after that. I wouldn't say that was the cause of her demise, but it contributed to it. She just wasn't the same, wasn't herself after that. It took too much of an emotional toll on her. So 2 times, yeah, I've known people to have been influenced. They just couldn't throw off that negative influence in their lives. Now I think in retrospect, I should have stayed with them. I should have done more. Maybe if we kept the investigation and the intervention going, but you don't know at the time, and it might not have helped.
I think too, once you go in and help somebody, isn't it true that if that person doesn't change some aspect of their life to move forward, they kind of get stuck and it invites that negative presence right back in?
Yeah, it does. It comes back, and as soon as it comes back, they figure, oh, all the progress I made is down the tubes, and it hasn't helped. But sometimes it's an ongoing process. I don't dread it because it seems to come back. But I wasn't there to. I was there to help one of these people. But talk about not being able to see the forest for the trees. I didn't know she was in that kind of turmoil and despair. And the other one, I wasn't around her. But you still, it's haunting because I feel in both those situations that I could have done more. Yeah, I just didn't know.
It's very similar, and we sometimes use the word intervention for what we do. But in that sense, if you hear the word intervention, a similar word you would hear for that is for addiction. And for people that go through addiction, they need to want the help. They want to have to help themselves because they can be forced to go to rehab, and they come back from rehab and they go back right on the drug. But if they go to rehab and knowing they want to quit and they change their life, they'll stay clean the rest of their lives unless they hit that moment that they doubt themselves again and they go back on that drug. The paranormal circumstance is the same way. They have to change their life. They have to have a different perspective.
Not an easy thing to do.
It's not. Changing your life is not an easy thing. And even if it's a negative thing, even if it's a demon, when it becomes so ingrained in your life and so intertwined, it's a big part of your life. And then when it goes disappearing, there's a hole within that individual. And that hole, as much as many people would think, they would fill it with love and happiness, sometimes it's dread, sometimes it's missing, sometimes something was missing to them. And that's what the allurement is. That's what draws it back. Because they don't change their life. They miss some of the moments. And it keeps it as an echo within themselves.
It's very true. We're just about out of time, but I do have one more question for you guys.
Sure.
I got a call last week about a case, and it's a single mom with an autistic boy. The kid, I think, is around 14, 15 years old. And she's claiming that this boy is demonic or is possessed. And she says that he is trying to kill himself and things of this nature. What would be your advice for a case like that?
Does sound like things we deal with, doesn't that?
Well, actually, I'm actually dealing with that because she did reach out. But in that same sense, though, is I did reach out to that person.
So you know who I'm talking about?
But no response back, though. No response back. I can clearly state that.
I found that, too, that sometimes the people are in dire need of help.
But they don't.
An intervention, and they don't they respond, they don't get back.
But in that same sense is like, how you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make the horse drink the water, right?
Right.
But in that circumstance, if it is legitimate and they are willing to respond, and there is suicide attempt taught, unfortunately, as much as they might not like it, a psychologist needs to be added, or a medical professional needs to be added right away. Because you know what, I am a religious counselor. I can do so because of my background. And I have the credence, the creditship to do so, but I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist, and suicide is a very risky thing. You want to get the right people involved. You want them to tell them to reach out, maybe even go to the hospital where they'll section these people off. And I hate that to do that because they will give them the wrong drugs or wrong things if they are really truly dealing with something. But if it's anything with suicide, the medical field has to be involved ASAP, because that's not something to play with. and it is dangerous. But back to that same point is, if that person truly wanted help and it really was that much of a dire, they would not leave a message of response to their situation and not answer it back if they really needed help.
And if it's something that dire, that extreme, where they believe it's demonic possession, I almost want them to feel it's something that's a supernatural agent, because then they're more likely to reach out to us. They're not likely to try and suppress it or ignore it. If they feel they're being harassed by a demon, call us. We'll talk to you at least. Yeah. We might be able to refer you to somebody that's helpful, or see if it is something more of a paranormal nature. But I want them to, reach out to us. Yeah. Let us know.
And for the people that are listening, I know not that, but this is kind of like an advertisement for psychology.com. You always hear, well, if I go to a psychologist, they're going to think I'm crazy. Well, you can go to psychology.com and refer to somebody that has the same spiritual belief systems as you, or close in the nature of who you are. So, don't be scared to reach out to somebody, because, to be honest, if Carl and I deal with you, or even myself, if I deal with you and you've dealt with this for a long time, you're most likely have post-traumatic stress disorder. So you better go seek somebody actively. You better go speak to somebody. And if you don't, then that's your wish. But mental health is a huge piece of this puzzle. And you always need to explore that element when you're dealing with this.
Psychological and the parapsychological. And sometimes the two meet in the middle.
Yeah. So thank you guys for being on the program. I really appreciate it.
It's been our pleasure. Yeah, I wish it was going on a little longer, in fact.
Yes. Maybe you need to have us on again to answer your other 2 pages.
I know. I could talk to you guys all day.
As long as you know our answers are generally 10 minutes apiece. We want to cover all bases. Don't want to leave anything out.
I do have one if you have time for one more.
Sure, of course.
So I know you guys are familiar with Emily Rose and Bobby Mackey's and all of that kind of stuff. Have you guys ever heard of The Demon of Brownsville Road by Bob Kramer? Have you heard that
name sounds like Bob Kramer, but I haven't heard of that specific. The Demon of Brownsville Road, huh? Where is that?
It's in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I know of this case because I grew up practically down that same street. It's in Southside Pittsburgh. But he says now he's a political figure of some sort in Pittsburgh now.
That's why it sounds familiar.
Which is kind of a big deal why he put out this book to begin with. So I really believe what he's talking about or what he claims. But all of the stories, the possession always seems to take place in the kids. Why do you think that is? They always centered around the kids.
They don't doubt so much. They're more receptive. They're more easily targeted. They're just, for some reasons, they are more susceptible at that formative stage. And they don't screen it as much. They don't doubt so much. If they feel something's taking over them or they sense this evil presence, they're going to vent it. They're going to give expression to it. So I think that's why they have it more. They can't control it or ward it or fight it as much as an adult would. But yeah, they've got all kinds of hormonal and psychological changes going on in their lives at that time. So they are like open pages for this, and they can be imprinted. You've heard of the child with the imaginary friend. That's almost commonplace. Well, sometimes the imaginary friend sticks around for a while longer. Oh, yeah. And children, as well as cats and dogs, tend to see things we don't see. They haven't grown out of it yet. It's a very precious time, a very malleable and formative time. Say the child between the age of broadly 5 to 14 years of age. They're more susceptible to paranormal strikes, paranormal influences. And that's why I tell families when they consult me, I think the subject is going to grow out of it after a while. You don't want to go through all this misery in the meantime, but give it a few years, I think the child will be over it. That boy in Providence, Rhode Island, Lucas, was 14 years of age. He was fine after that. It took a lot of effort, and it was a very precarious time for him. Those few years when he was being taken over by a personality. But I stayed in touch with him. I was still friends with him. And and it went to the back of my mind. I'd forgotten that this boy was actually a subject of possession. So I asked him one day when I was thinking of it, I said, do you remember what happened 3 years ago? I mean, what do you remember about that? He goes, not that much. I said, you don't remember anything? He said, yeah, bits and pieces, but I don't have any feeling associated with it. I just know something happened and people were paying attention to it. So he was removed from it. He was okay after that. So he apparently didn't have any lasting effects from it. But I know he was going through hell for a while. And I think it was because he was taken over at times. That's why he didn't remember it perfectly. I remembered it, but he didn't. But even I hadn't thought about it for a while. But he was just that age, from the time he was 11 to 14, going through that process.
So what's your advice for investigators that run into a true demonic presence?
Well, we're going to have our number up there at the end of your show, so get in touch. I've written a book along with co-author Lana Jan Brock, who's an accredited theologian, Shatter Realm's Demonology Handbook, and it's kind of a primer. I think it's an easy read. It's 300 pages, but it's a series of essays, and some of it's anecdotal. And it's like if you run into trouble or run into a situation, let's see what this guy Carl did. And some things I've done differently, and some things I said, oh yeah, that worked. But reach out. It's hard to find a reliable demonologist. I'm finding it's hard to find a reliable chiropractor. I mean, because there's a lot that's unknown. But get in touch, look around. It's not somebody that's going to say that you have a demon. I see you have 2 demons. I can see them in your face. They need to be driven out and separated. Somebody that's going to do a thorough and very grounded investigation and ask, do you take any medications, any pharmaceuticals? Have you consulted, a professional medical person? And somebody that's going to take that approach, and we'll sit down and talk about it, because every case is different. You don't always need to take a religious approach to it. You've got to know the subject.
Yeah.
So reach out. And really, I mean it when I say do get in touch with us, because if we can't directly assist you, we can direct you in the right direction. We can point you towards someone who can.
Yeah, and you can reach us out at demonology.org, but I had to shoot it out. But the worst thing you can do too is, especially if you're dealing with something, is don't, and I like to use this as the modern day analogy, is don't WebMD it. Don't think the worst case scenario if you're experiencing something. If you start experiencing something, as Carl said, look up a reliable source. Carl and I don't tend to charge unless it's gas, because it's across the yonders of Guam, and it's hard to get there on our dime. But don't stay away from the person that's going to charge you $5,000, $10,000, $100, $500. Feel comfortable with that person. Don't let them tell you the directive, but they're going to listen. Like Carl says, they're going to figure out different routes. They're going to ask questions. And they're not just going to say yes. If you believe you are dealing with the circumstance, we're not here to judge you, but we will make sure that we get to the bottom of why you're dealing with that.
Yeah, we won't just leave you in the lurch. Yeah. We'll find some, if not a solution from us, then someone who will work with you. But do consult us, because we know about the demonology angle. We can talk about it with you. Not going to diagnose it over the phone and say, yes, you definitely have a demon. You fit the criteria. But we'll talk about it.
All right.
And try to lighten it.
You guys, thank you again.
Thank you for having us.